You know that feeling of finally achieving something that once seemed impossible? I felt that. I spent years working abroad, saving every penny, turning down nights out with friends, postponing vacations, all to fulfill one dream, buying my first house. It was the perfect place. A spacious yard with old trees swaying in the wind, a bright living room where I could already picture myself sipping coffee on Sunday mornings. It was more than just a house. It was proof that all my hard work had paid off. Since I was still finishing a work assignment overseas, I trusted my parents to handle all the paperwork. They had always been my safe haven. If there was anyone I could trust blindly, it was them. So, I left the documents in their hands while I completed my last few months abroad. What I didn't know was that this would be the biggest mistake of my life. When I finally came back home, my heart raced with anticipation. I couldn't wait to step into the place that was now mine. But as I pulled up in front of the house, I saw a moving truck. It caught me off guard. I thought maybe the previous owners were just picking up the last of their stuff. I got closer and saw a couple carrying boxes inside. Confused, I went to talk to them. Hi. Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I recently bought this house. The woman looked at me like I was crazy. No. We bought this house a month ago. I laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. But her expression was serious. I felt the ground vanish beneath my feet. What did she mean they bought my house? No. This couldn't be happening. I ran to my parents' house, my heart pounding. I needed answers. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. I found my parents in the kitchen, their faces heavy with guilt. My instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. Dad. Mom, what happened to my house? They exchanged a weighted look before my dad spoke, his voice almost a whisper. We needed to help your brother. His name hit me like a punch. Oliver. My younger brother. The one who was always getting into trouble. The one who had a history of debts and bad decisions. The one I was always trying to help. What did you do? I practically shouted. My mom started to cry. My dad explained, his voice loaded with guilt. He was in trouble, Hannah, owing money to dangerous people. If we didn't pay, he would have been in danger. We had no choice. So you sold my house? Nausea hit me. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. You sold my house to pay off his debts? Without telling me? My mom wiped her tears and said something I'll never forget. You were far away, and we did what we thought was right. Right? Right for who? I worked for years to buy that house. I lost sleep, sacrificed so much, and they just threw it all away to save Oliver? The betrayal burned like poison in my veins. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look at them. I just wanted to get away. And that's exactly what I did. I ran out of there. My own family had stabbed me in the back. I don't think I've fully processed any of this yet. It feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. But I'm going to find out how they did it. Someone forged my signature. Someone lied. And I won't rest until I know exactly who, and why. I couldn't sleep that night. But how could this be right? How could they just sell my house to save Oliver? And without even telling me? I trusted them. I believed they would never do anything to hurt me. I was wrong. The next morning, still with a pounding headache and eyes swollen from crying, I decided I needed answers. I called the bank where I financed the house. I'm sorry, but the property was paid off and transferred to a new owner over a month ago, the representative informed me, her calmness making me want to scream. I almost dropped the phone. What do you mean it was paid off? I never authorized any sale. Well, it shows here that you signed all the necessary documents. My blood ran cold. I was out of the country. That's impossible. The line went silent for a moment. In that case, I suggest you seek legal assistance. If there's a suspicion of fraud, you'll need to challenge it in court. Fraud. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had pretended to be me to sell my house. I could only think of one thing, my family. I drove back to my parents' house, my heart racing. I didn't know what I'd do if they admitted to forging my signature, but I needed to hear them say it. When I arrived, Oliver was there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My voice came out cold, almost a whisper. Did you know? Oliver looked away. His silence was the confession I needed. So, it's true, I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You didn't just sell my house. You forged my signature. My mom walked into the room, her face pale. Hannah, please. It wasn't like that. Then how was it, Mom? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. I shouted this time. I trusted you. I bled for that house. And you sold it, because of Oliver's debts? My dad appeared behind her, looking broken, as if he had aged 10 years overnight. He was in danger. He owed money to loan sharks. They threatened to kill him, Hannah. What did you expect us to do? Anything but this. The words flew out before I could stop them. You should have told me. We could have figured it out together. But you chose to stab me in the back. I looked at Oliver, who still hadn't said a word. Do you even know how much I sacrificed to buy that house? He didn't respond. He just looked down. And that hurt more than any scream or excuse. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tears that threatened to return. Did you forge my signature? My dad stared at the floor. My mom started crying. And then Oliver finally spoke, his voice trembling. It was me. The air was knocked out of my lungs. I didn't expect him to admit it. I didn't want to hear it. You. My voice broke. You stole from me? You did all this? I didn't have a choice. He shouted, finally looking me in the eye. They were going to kill me, Hannah. Do you get that? I was desperate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to scream at him, to hate him, to forgive him, but I didn't know what to feel anymore. Only one thing became clear in my mind. They were no longer my family. I turned around before they could say anything else. I couldn't stand to be there another second. I ran out, my mom's sobs echoing behind me as I walked down the street. I was alone now. No house. No family. But I had something they didn't expect, determination. Someone approved that sale. Someone accepted a forged signature. I was going to find out who, and I was going to get back what was mine. No matter what it took. I just didn't know this was only the beginning of the nightmare. When I walked out of that house, it felt like I left a part of myself behind. My trust, my innocence, my family. I didn't know how to deal with that pain. All I knew was that I needed to fight. In the days that followed, my mind spun with questions. How did they manage to forge my signature without raising any red flags? Who helped make that sale happen? I needed answers. And for that, I needed professional help. I went to the office of a lawyer recommended by a friend, Dr. Sophie Meyer. She greeted me with a serious look, the kind that can spot a legal mess from a mile away. I told her everything, leaving nothing out. The betrayal, the sale of the house, the forgery. Everything. When I finished, she was silent for a moment before speaking, her voice firm and professional. This is clearly a case of real estate fraud. If your signature was forged, we can challenge the sale. But we need proof. Proof. I needed to prove that my own family did this to me. I never thought it was possible to hate anyone as much as I hated that thought. Where do we start? I asked. We'll trace the transaction. We need to see who was responsible for notarizing the documents and who approved the sale at the registry office. If there was forgery, someone on the inside was involved. Registry office. Of course. Someone had authenticated the fake signature. And I was going to find out who. It took me days to get the sale records. Hours waiting in endless lines, dealing with bureaucratic employees. But finally, I held a copy of the signed documents in my hands, with my name scribbled at the bottom. But the worst part came when I saw the name of the person who authenticated the signature, David Foster. I recognized that name. David was a friend of my dad's. An old family acquaintance. It felt like a second punch to the gut. Not only did my family betray me, but they also used connections to forge everything. They had planned this. They knew exactly what they were doing. I felt more and more suffocated by the sense of betrayal. But I couldn't stop now. I wasn't going to give up. I took the name to Dr. Sophie. She raised an eyebrow. If he's connected to your family, it's going to be complicated, but not impossible. If he notarized the signature knowing it was fake, he committed a crime. We can subpoena him to testify. The thought of confronting David sent chills down my spine. He'd been in my life since I was a kid. He gave me Christmas presents. He called me his honorary niece. And now, he was part of the scheme that destroyed my dream. But I was ready to fight, even if it meant exposing everyone. That night, my phone rang. It was Oliver. I didn't want to answer. I wanted to erase his existence from my mind. But the pain was still too fresh. Part of me wanted to understand why he did this to me. I picked up without saying anything. On the other end, I heard his heavy breathing before he finally spoke. Hannah. I'm so sorry. My blood boiled. Sorry? You stole my house, Oliver. You forged my signature. You betrayed me, our family betrayed me. He was silent. When he spoke again, his voice was choked up. You don't understand, they were threatening me. They said they'd hurt you all too. I didn't know what to do. I was desperate. I wanted to feel sorry for him. I wanted to believe he did it all to protect the family. But all I could feel was anger. You threw away my dream to save your own skin. I know, he was crying now. I know I can't fix this. But, you need to know Dad pressured David to forge the signature. He did it because he thought he was protecting us. I just let it happen. I hung up on him. I couldn't listen to any more of it. My dad manipulated David. He used their friendship to deceive me. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I wanted this to be a nightmare. I wanted to wake up in a world where my family hadn't destroyed everything I loved. The truth was poison burning in my throat, suffocating me. But I wasn't going to give up. I was going to face every single one of them. David. Oliver. My parents. All of them. This was my fight now. And I was determined to get back what was mine, no matter what I had to sacrifice to do it. After I hung up on Oliver, I just stared at the wall, trying to piece everything together. I knew I needed to confront David, but how? Part of me wanted to storm into his office and scream until he admitted everything. But I knew I had to be smarter than that. I called David to set up a coffee date, pretending it was just to catch up since it had been a while. I used my most casual tone, trying to hide the lump in my throat. He sounded genuinely excited on the phone. Hannah. What a surprise. Of course, it'd be great to see you. When are you getting here? I'm already in town, I replied, trying to sound relaxed. Can we meet up tomorrow afternoon? He agreed right away, suggesting that cafe downtown where we used to talk about everything. I spent the night rehearsing what I would say. I needed to confront him without letting him know I was onto him. I wanted him to slip up, to betray himself with his own words. The next day, I arrived at the cafe a little early. When he showed up, he looked just like always. Broad smile, confident stride, that warm demeanor that made him so trustworthy. Hannah. He hugged me tightly, as if nothing had happened. David. Wow, it's been so long. I smiled, trying to match his enthusiasm. You haven't changed a bit. He laughed, sitting across from me. Neither have you. Still the same smart, determined girl. So, how was your time abroad? I pretended to tell him about work, the trips, all the things I really wanted to share with him, before I found out about the betrayal. I wanted him to think everything was normal, that I didn't suspect a thing. After some small talk, I let it slip as if it were just a casual remark. Oh, by the way, about the house. I was so surprised when I found out it was sold. Did you know about that? He froze for a second. A tiny second, but it was enough to give him away. Then he nodded, carefully choosing his words. Oh, yeah. Your dad mentioned they were restructuring their finances. I assumed you knew. I feigned surprise. Yeah. I only found out when I got back. It was so weird. I don't remember signing anything. He looked uncomfortable. He fiddled with his coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. Oh, maybe you signed before you traveled and just forgot. It happens, right? He was lying. I knew it. But he was good at it. I had to be better. Maybe, it's just that I really don't remember. And I saw your name on the paperwork as a witness. Were you there when I signed? This time, he couldn't hide the tension. His face went a little pale, his fingers tightening around his cup. Oh, yeah. It was all very quick, you know how it is. Your dad wanted to speed things up so you wouldn't have to worry about it while you were away. My throat went dry, but I kept going. I see, and you notarized the signature too, right? He nodded, forcing a smile. Yep, as the family lawyer. Standard procedure. Of course, I looked him right in the eyes. But how did you notarize it if I was on the other side of the world, David? His face went completely pale. He tried to laugh, but it came out forced. Oh, well, I had power of attorney, of course. Your dad arranged everything. You must have signed it along with other documents before you left. I wanted to scream that he was lying, but I stayed calm. Oh, that explains it. Do you still have that power of attorney? I'd like to take a look, just to clear this up in my head. I saw panic flash across his face. It was subtle, but it was there. Oh, yeah, sure, it must be filed at the office. But it might take a while to find, you know, so many papers. I gave him a cold smile. That's fine, I can wait. Let me know when you find it. He nodded quickly, changing the subject to ease the tension. But by then, I already knew. He didn't have any power of attorney. He forged my signature. I left the cafe feeling a mix of relief and despair. I had the confirmation I needed, but that only made it all more real. I took everything to Dr. Sophie. She went over my notes, her face growing darker as she read. He's stalling. If he can't produce that power of attorney, it's because it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, he notarized the sale without your consent. That's fraud. Fraud. The word felt too heavy to be tied to someone I'd known since childhood. We'll subpoena him for that power of attorney. If he can't produce it, we can prove the sale was illegal. That would open a criminal case against him, and your parents, if they were involved. My parents. I'd been so focused on exposing David that I'd forgotten the full weight of this truth. If I proved the sale was fraudulent, my parents could end up in jail. Is there any other way to handle this? My voice was shaky. I still loved them, despite everything. Sophie looked at me with a mix of pity and understanding. The only alternative would be to negotiate a settlement. But for that, they'd have to admit what they did, and reverse the sale. Do you think they'd be willing to do that? I wanted to believe they would. I wanted to believe that, deep down, they still loved me enough to fix this. But, what if they didn't? I left Sophie's office feeling torn. If I confronted them, they might try to cover it up even more. But if I sued them, I could destroy them. Either way, I was about to tear my family apart. The only question was I ready for that? I got back to the car after my meeting with Dr. Sophie, trying to process everything she said. Her words echoed in my head: fraud, criminal charges, family destruction. It was hard to believe we were talking about my life, my family. On the way back, I felt a weight pressing on me. I had to confront them. I needed to know how far this went. And I needed to do it now. I drove straight to my parents' house. My mom answered the door with a tense smile, as if she already knew why I was there. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back, crossing my arms. We need to talk. My dad was in the living room, eyes fixed on the TV, but the remote was trembling in his hand. He knew. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at both of them. I talked to David, I blurted out, watching their reactions. My mom went pale. My dad looked away, gripping the remote tighter. You lied to me, I continued, my voice coming out louder than I intended. You sold my house without my permission, forged my signature, all to pay off Oliver's debts. My mom let out a muffled sob, covering her mouth with her hand. My dad finally looked at me, his eyes tired and heavy with guilt. I wanted to feel compassion. I wanted to understand their side. But the anger was burning too strong. So you sacrificed my dream? My security? My future? And you didn't even have the decency to tell me? My dad finally spoke, his voice low and heavy with shame. It was my idea. I asked David to forge the signature. You were away. I thought I could fix everything before you came back. Fix. I laughed, a bitter and cruel sound. You thought you could fix this at my expense? You sold the house and gave the money to Oliver, didn't you? And he paid off his debts, but what happened after that? Did he stop gambling? Their silence was the confirmation I needed. Of course not. You didn't help him. You just swept the problem under the rug. The pain on my mom's face made my heart clench. But I couldn't back down. Not this time. I talked to Dr. Sophie. I know I can sue you for fraud. And if I do, you could end up in jail. My dad stood motionless, his face gray as stone. My mom collapsed on the couch, her hands shaking. I turned my back, ignoring my mom's pleas. As I walked out the door, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Had I done the right thing? Or had I just destroyed my own family? I got in the car, tears finally falling as I drove away. I didn't know what I would do next. But one thing was certain, I would never trust them again. In the days that followed, the emptiness remained, but the pain began to turn into acceptance. I hired Dr. Sophie to handle the case. I didn't want to sue my parents, but I needed justice. After a long and painful legal battle, I got the house back. But when I walked inside again, I realized it wasn't a home anymore. The memories were tainted by betrayal. I decided to sell it. Not for the money, but to move on. I bought a new apartment, smaller, but cozy. I'm learning to forgive, not just them but also myself, for not seeing what was happening right under my nose. Oliver went to rehab. We haven't spoken since that day at the cafe, but I heard he's trying to change. Despite everything, he's still my brother. This journey was painful, full of loss and betrayal. But somehow, I found the strength to keep moving forward. And maybe one day, I'll find the strength to forgive.